It all began in New Jersey, back in the old neighborhood, under a street light with just a couple of guys singing harmony. But through all the success, these guys always remembered the old neighborhood. So let's go back home with our second nominee for Best Musical, Jersey Boys.
You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off you. You'd be like heaven to touch. I wanna hold you so much. At long last, love has arrived, and I thank God I'm alive. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you.
The musical Jersey Boys tells the story of four guys in the classic rags to riches journey. However, their fairy tale is a little different than expected, hitting many bumps along the road. But what is the difference between the band that went straight to number one and the jukebox musical that no one was interested in? What's the difference between the Italian mafia of Newark, New Jersey and the Broadway critics? And what is the difference between this Frankie Valli and this Frankie Valli? Francis Castelluccio was born into a typical Italian family in Newark, New Jersey in what people believe to be 1937. The record label put out a later year claiming he was younger to appeal to a larger and younger demographic. His real age is under suspicion. Who could have guessed that the Italian misfit, with a love of jazz and blues and the unusually high falsetto, could become legendary? Changing his name to fit his image, Francis Castelluccio became Frankie Valli. Newark, being a hot spot for partygoers in the local nightclubs, was filled with music in the 50s and early 60s. Also from Newark, Nicholas Massiosi, known to most as Nick Massey, was in a musical group playing on the local scene with Tommy DeVito and his brother Nick DeVito. Nicky became Frankie's mentor, often calling him up to sing in their set after hearing Frankie's unique voice. Frankie could hit high notes up at a range never heard before. However, as people often did in Jersey in the 50s and 60s, Nick Massey and Nick DeVito were arrested one night and had to serve jail time for a few months. The position was then put on Tommy to guide Frankie and lead the group. He would stay in charge their entire career. Nick DeVito, having a previous record, had to stay in prison for a much greater time period than Nick Massey. When Massey was let out, he rejoined the group with Frankie and Tommy to become the Three Lovers. But according to Tommy, trios, like the Angels, were then dead. They needed a fourth member to complete the group. What many people don't know is actor Joe Pesci also grew up in Jersey and was good friends with Tommy. Well, if you can consider them friends, being that Tommy sort of just pushed Joe around. Even though Tommy picked on him, like a faithful puppy, Joe stuck around with the guys. For what little respect he was given, Tommy, Nicky, and Frankie owed Joe the world. Joe, after all, was the one who found them the missing piece to their puzzle. Bob Gaudio was a musical prodigy, having played a piano recital at Carnegie Hall at age 7. He wrote, composed, and performed music. Frankie once called him the best writer in the business. Bob, known as the last piece of the puzzle, was the final member they had been looking for, even if they didn't know it yet. Joe Pesci had heard of Bob, who grew up just north of Newark, because he had already written a #1 hit with his current group, the Royal Teens. The song was short shorts and could be heard on all the local radio stations. Joe, against Tommy's wishes, set up a meeting with Bob and the guys after one of the Lovers' local performances. As soon as he heard Frankie's falsetto, Bob knew he had to write for him. After a lot of arguing, it was Frankie who convinced Tommy to let Bob into the group. They went back and forth between names such as the Four Lovers, the Romans, and the Topics. One night, they were outside after a performance. They had been arguing over names, and Nicky, as he often did, threatened to quit and form his own group. When the fight was over, they looked up and saw the sign for the Four Seasons Lounge. They believed it to be a sign, so from there on out, they would be named the Four Seasons. As the Four Seasons, they would have many successes. They produced 25 albums, sold over 175 million records, and played hundreds of shows on countless tours. With Bob and their producer, Bob Crew, at the head, they wrote many chart toppers, such as Sherry, a song written by Gaudio on the spot when studio time became suddenly available, Walk Like a Man, Big Girls Don't Cry, December 1988, or Oh What a Night, and many more. But with all of the success came great failure as well. The boys were always out on the road touring. Frankie had a wife, Mary, and 3 daughters back in Jersey that he never saw. His marriage fell apart and his family distanced because of the lack of time he spent at home. His next girlfriend left him for the same reason. Also, Frankie's youngest daughter, Francine, died of an overdose at the young age of 22. She was an aspiring singer, following in her father's footsteps. He took great pride in her, so this left a huge impact on Frankie and inspired his song, Fallen Angel. In the early 70s, the band began to split. Nick quit without any explanation in the middle of a tour and headed back to New Jersey. Tommy had an extremely bad gambling problem and ended up $1.5 million in debt and in trouble with the Mafia. He was bought out of the group and sent back by the Mafia to stay in Las Vegas. Bob, deciding his heart was in writing and not performing, convinced Frankie to go solo. Bob and Frankie always had a special bond. Frankie convinced Tommy to let Bob into the group and believed in him when no one else did. They made a very famous pact, saying that the two of them would split whatever they made, even if the other was not involved. Frankie would get half of the money produced from what Bob wrote, and Bob would get half of the money produced from what Frankie sang. What makes this pact so famous is that it was made with a Jersey contract, or a handshake. Over 50 years later, this pact is still true in everything they do.